I'm sitting in a hot tub because today's video tip of the day is about using heat exposure to incite muscle growth. That's right, heat exposure, like sitting in a hot tub or a sauna, might actually help to enhance muscle growth. Now this isn't some crazy folklore, witch doctor, bro science type of a deal. This is actual science behind the way that heat may incite muscle growth. And that has to do with what's called heat shock proteins. Now, these are functional proteins in the body that do a number of jobs, but they're involved in the way the body reacts to heat. So they were given the name heat shock proteins. But like I said, they do far more than just their involvement in heat stress. And one of the areas that I used to study at the University of Connecticut was thermal physiology, which is basically the way that the body responds to heat or cold, and heat shock proteins were something that we actually looked at in the lab, so this is not news to me. Anyway, what the research suggests is that increasing the activity of these heat shock proteins may increase muscle growth. That's right, it might look like I'm relaxing and having a good time in the hot tub, but I may also be boosting muscle growth. Now, the way this was discovered was that scientists found that during exercise, intense exercise, heat shock proteins increase, much like they do when exposed to the heat. And since they also saw this with more resistance type exercises, more weight training type exercises, if you will, they hypothesized that possibly heat shock proteins enhance the adaptations that we make after exercise. In other words, the results that you get from training, heat shock proteins might play a role. You know, there's numerous theories about the way muscles grow. You know, muscles get damaged and then they get rebuilt, bigger and stronger. There's also an increase in muscle protein synthesis, yada, yada, yada. We've only got theories, guys. I mean, yes, these mechanisms do take place in the muscle cell, but there are so many other factors that play a role. Possibly heat shock proteins are just yet another one of probably thousands that we're yet to discover over the next hundreds of years as science progresses. So heat shock proteins might actually be involved in the adaptations, the responses, the results you get from exercise, greater muscle growth, greater endurance, speed. Interesting, they found that, at least in rats, that when they expose them to heat, about 105 degrees Fahrenheit or around somewhere 41 degrees Celsius, that not only do they have an increase in the heat shock proteins, but these animals have an increase in muscle growth without doing any exercise, just the exposure to the heat. So heat shock proteins may play a critical role in enhancing muscle size. In fact, one study, this was a 2012 study by the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Medicine. This study was done in rats, and they basically forced the rats to do eccentric exercise, negative rep training. Those of you who've done my 6 weeks to sick arms program know a thing or two about negative rep training, how brutal it can be, and how effective it can be for muscle growth. But in this case, they used downhill running. Downhill running is a form of eccentric exercise because you're basically landing very forcefully with each step, which is basically a negative rep. Now, one group just did the downhill running. A second group had heat exposure 20 minutes at about 41 degrees Celsius and around 105 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 minutes, 2 days before the eccentric exercise bout. And what they found is that the rats that had the heat exposure were able to maintain higher muscle protein levels in the leg muscles that were exercised. And one of the theories is that the heat shock proteins may minimize the damage in the muscle. And people say, well, damage is a good thing. Yes, well, the mechanical damage already happened from the workout. You can't enhance that. What happens next is chemical damage. You have an influx of chemicals that come in and basically eat up the muscle protein. Well, what it appears to be is that the heat shock proteins sort of minimize some of that further degradation, maintaining more muscle mass. All right, so let me cut to the chase and get to how to use this for yourself. So basically what the research is suggesting is that about 20 minutes of heat exposure for up to 2 days prior to your workout may actually enhance the results that you get from that workout. So the timing doesn't appear to be that critical. One study, the rats were exposed 2 days prior and they still had the benefits. And the other study was done, they were exposed daily. So timing doesn't really matter. I would probably suggest sometime after you train. Do it prior to you train. That heat stress may sort of zap your energy and you might not have the best workout. So stick to it as a method of recovery sometime after your workout. It doesn't have to be immediately after, but sometime after the workout. Now, as far as temperatures go, the research is basically done in rats, so we don't have too much hard data that we can rely on, but it appears that as long as you're in a temperature of about 105 degrees, that's what the animals were exposed to, air temperature. Now, if you go in a sauna, which is a way to increase heat exposure through the air, temperatures may be up in the 175 degree range. So going in there is definitely going to take you up to that point as far as temperature exposure that you're going to need. Hot tubs now. Most hot tubs somewhere in the range of anywhere from about 100 to a max of about 104 degrees. However, hot tubs use water as the method of transferring heat. So it's a much faster form of heat transfer. It's conduction, so transferring more heat to the body. So even though it's not quite at 105 degrees, it's very close to it. That was 105 degrees air temperature. This is, 100 to 104 degrees water temperature. That's different. That's going to be sufficient enough to raise your body temperature enough to increase those huge high proteins. That might help with muscle growth. And then if you don't have access to either, you can just simply sit in your tub at home, crank up the water temperature to as much as you could stand, and enjoy a 20-minute soak while you're thinking about muscle growth. Hope you're enjoying these tips, guys. And as always, stay Gym Army strong.